Hello, today I'm going to do a capsule game. It's StarGate from SPI in 1979. Game designed by John H. Butterfield. Graphic design by Redmond A. Simonson. Illustrations by Charles Vess and Rick Bryant. And of course, John Butterfield and Redmond Simonson have been involved in many other great games, so I'm curious to check that out. And also, Charles Voss and Rick Bryant have been involved in some good ones too. For instance, here's also Titan Strike, which I reviewed previously, and I like the art on that quite a bit as well. And you can see similarity in the approach. They're both very well done, of course. This is a StarGate, and you have a coalition forces going against the Virunians. As always, subscriptions are appreciated. It's SPI's Space Capsule Game number 2. StarGate, the final space battle for galactic freedom. And everything's contained within this booklet, which is 8.5 inches by 5.5 inches. And on the back is a summary. SPI came out with like Outreach and Star Force as well, and those are, full games. And they have Stargates in them as well, but it seems this doesn't seem to directly connect into those, because it talks about different races, etc. Here's a summary. Streaming through the mysterious Stargates, the power-hungry Virunian forces have racked the Milky Way for nearly 80 years in the War of Purification. Remnants of the civilizations devastated by the Virunian Tri-Ships band together in a determined coalition await the moment to launch their counterstroke. In 2519 AD, the moment has arrived. The Virunians encounter their nemesis and, retreating headlong to the source of their power, find themselves dispersed and without their potent unified command. Coalition telepaths, sensing the Virunian confusion, direct their forces to the Null Gate, arriving just as the first helpless Virunian vessels tumble forth from the Stargates. The battle to ensue will decide the Virunian fate in the galaxy. StarGate recreates this battle. So that's the premise of the game. Everything's included in this booklet. Open it up here. Have the rules. It's 4 pages. Got StarGate charts and tables. And it's 1 page, but it's got 2 sets of charts and tables. And then the counters would be included in here as well. And the actual cover of this folds out to a map. Here's the map, which folds out from the front cover. It's a thickish paper, and it's 11 by 17 inches or so. It's a plane of space 1 light minute across. And it's, of course, it's got hexes, and it has a couple Stargates here. Stargate A is located at 0914. StarGate B is at hex 0706, and each of them is surrounded by the 6 hexes, which are called orbit hexes. Then the null gate is over here in hex 2109. And the two StarGates and the null gate X is the focal point for the positive and negative numbered hexes, which affect the strength of some of the units in the game. And down here we have the coalition staging area. Kind of a basic map, but looks like it's set up well to perform its function, and the colors are pleasing enough. And this sheet that has got two copies of the same charts and tables here for the two different players. And it's a set up for two players, but one player has several coalition forces, so I suppose you could break the one side up into players of different coalition forces. So the StarGate charts and tables, you have the approach option matrix, Virunian combined unit capabilities chart, shielded approach chart, and then the combat results table. There's not many counters involved, but even though there's a small quantity, there's a fair amount of variety. There's several just blank counters that aren't used that are just on the sheet, but they wouldn't be used. These are randomization counters 1 through 6. Since it's a capsule game, it doesn't come with a dice, and these are just meant to be used instead of dice, but I came across a small SPI dice I got on eBay, so I'll just use small SPI dice, but this doesn't come with the game. And then these are orange is Virunian forces, light blue are human forces, kind of this teal is Iguchi, dark blue is Metamexish, and the green are the Duanipes. These are some game markers. And the orange are the Virunian units. And those you have the image of the ship type, the letters, the tri-ship designation. This is the first number is the attack strength, second is the defense strength, and the third is the movement allowance. And the types are, here's the Virunian control, the Virunian transport, Virunian weapons, and the Virunian monad. For the coalition forces, for the humans, this is their device, and for coalition units, it's got attack strength for the first one, defense strength for the second, and movement allowance for the third. And then you have a number identifier on top. This is the humans, the Iguchi, the Metamexish, and the Duanipes. Got maneuver option markers, warp option markers, charge option markers. And these are the skim markers, 1 and 2. Before set up and play, I'll mainly talk about the rules at a high level and just kind of pick out some high points here. And then I'll show them in detail in the setup and play. Basically, a couple interesting things about it are the different allied units have different movements. Humans and Duanipes do linear movement and also turns. And then the Iguchi do teleportation. And they can also do linear as well and turning. And then the Metamexish do wobbling. And I'll show those in play. And then the Virunian units, they have tri-units where they can stack together different combinations. There's there's a control aspect, a transport aspect, and a weapon module or aspect. So they're all kind of different modules, and they can go individually or be combined together. If they're stacked together, then they have different combat and movement capabilities. Shown here, for instance, if you have control and transport together, combat strength and movement, type and allowance. You do controlled weapons, transport weapons, controlled transport and weapons, all three. And that affects the combat, also movement. So that's a very interesting aspect of it. And then when units go in the orbit around in the hexes around the StarGate, they're basically kind of pulled in by the gravity a bit, and they have to kind of slingshot around, and that's what skimming is. And these markers are to show how many turns they've done in the skimming. Then also there's the approach, where one unit is going to the hex of an enemy unit. They have to choose how they're going to approach, whether they're going to warp, charge, or maneuver, and that's what these indicators are for. Let's kind of talk about the rules at a high level here and then show more detail when I get into setup and play. The game turn sequence is do the coalition staging segment, where you place up to 4 units in the coalition staging area. Virunian player turn, deployment phase. Virunian player randomly deploys his ship units in the 2 StarGates. Figure out how many ships are around each of the 2 StarGates. Movement phase. The Virunian player may move 1 unit from each Tri-Ship group by either moving units on the map or flipping over units within the StarGate. However, when a second unit of Tri-Ship has been moved, the Virunian movement phase automatically ends. Combat phase. Virunian player must now attack all coalition units with which he has friendly units stacked, or to which he has a Tri-Ship adjacent. Coalition player turn. Movement phase. Coalition player may move near all of his units and must move those in the coalition staging area. Combat phase. The coalition player must now attack all Virunian units with which he has friendly units stacked. Then movement. So there's different types. There's linear, shown here, and human, Iguigi, Dwenup, and Virunian transport and weapon units do linear movement. And then turning. May attempt to turn a unit that's been moved in linear movement. Gate skimming. That's when you have units go in a StarGate orbit hex. When it's moved into an orbit hex, it must move through at least 2 more orbit hexes before leaving the orbit hex. And that's why you use these skimmer counters to indicate how many movements you've done, in case you do it in a couple different turns. And here's an example, which is acceptable and then also prohibited. And examples of legal where you skimming versus not. Here's some legal examples. A, B, and C. Here's an illegal where it's you didn't do enough movement. E, kind of go out the wrong way. F, you change some orientations. And talks about teleportation. Iguigi units and certain Virunian combined units can do teleportation. So Iguigi human teleportation, Iguigi units, they're not moved during the coalition movement phase, may lead their teleporting ability to human units. wobbling. Metamexish and Virunian control units are moved by wobbling. Wobbling represents multi-dimensional travel through known and unknown space. Units that are moved by wobbling are not subject to one-dimensional restrictions of linear movement. They may be moved up to as many hexes as their movement allowance states in any direction or combination of directions. Mindless transport units. If a Virunian control unit is eliminated, transport unit of the same tri-ship group is moved at random. And there's some restrictions of movement which I'll show. Virunian Tri-Ship movement. Tri-ship is moved by teleportation. Virunian monads. These don't belong to a tri-ship. They're not subject to Virunian movement restrictions. Each have a common strength of 5 and a linear movement allowance of 6. They may not be stacked with other Virunian units. Then approach. So it affects combat how you approaches when you are going into your enemy's hex. You're either needing warp, charge, or maneuver for that. Shielded approach. When a player is moving a unit into an enemy occupied space, hex, the player with the greatest number of units in the hex is shielded, and that has some effects on combat. And talk about stacking limitations. Virunian Tri-Ship stacking. When the train is all together, or two modules of a tri-ship are stacked together, then they're one unit, and you track them according to, the letter indicator, all A's are together or all B's, etc. Then combat, generally you look at the utility attack strengths of all units involved in attack versus the defense strength, and use a combat results table. Discussion of which ones can attack. Virunian Tri-Ships must attack all enemy units with which they are stacked or adjacent. Berserk weapon units. If a Virunian control unit is eliminated, the weapons of the same tri-ship goes berserk. The weapons unit instantly attacks the nearest unit, regardless of the phase, at twice normal strength, or 6. Range is not taken into account in the attack. Then ranged attacks. Some units, if they're not in the same hex but adjacent, they can provide their support to attacks going on in that hex. Calculating that. The StarGate and nullgate fields. The Virunians get their power from the nullgate. So around the StarGate and the nullgate, you get these pluses or minuses, and these are modifications to the Virunian combat scores. So they're higher around the nullgate, which are they're getting their force from, and less around the StarGates. And that'll be modified during combat. There's a nullgate gravitational force, which has the potential of sucking units into the nullgate. If at the end of the game turn there are any Virunian or coalition units in any energy hexes, value 4, this possibility erratic gravity of the nullgate will capture a unit and send it plummeting to a fire death. Dice rolled by the Virunian player. Roll 1 and 2, 1 Virunian unit in a 4-point area hex is eliminated. 3 to 4, 1 coalition unit. 5 or 6, no unit is eliminated. Victory conditions. Victory is achieved by either player when he fulfills conditions described below. Virunian. If at any point the coalition player has lost 8 units, and in these 8 there is at least 1 unit from each of the 4 races, the Virunian player is immediately declared the winner. Coalition victory. If at any point the Virunian player has lost at least 1 unit from each of his 6 tri-ship groups, coalition player is immediately declared the winner. If both isn't in the first condition filled at the same time, the coalition player is declared the winner. Here's more detailed design credits. Designer John Butterfield. Physical systems and graphics Redmond A. Simonson. Space capsule development staff shown here. Line testing, rules editing, production. Then we'll get into setup and play where I'll show more detailed implementation of the rules. Do setup here. First of all, you take up to 1 unit from each of the 4 coalition types. Put them in the coalition staging area. I'll put them in these locations. And then you put all the Virunian counters face down, so randomized. And then for each of the StarGates, they roll to see how many of the Virunian forces are deployed in there. For StarGate A, 2. Put them face down on the StarGate. StarGate B, 3. Take them randomly from the pile and put them face down on the StarGate. So in the first turn you take the full die roll, but in subsequent turns you divide that in half to put that number in there. Then Virunian movement. In my reading the rules, it's not completely. There seem to be some contradictions in there. It says you may move or flip over Virunians, or you may, if you move a flipped over, you flip it over, then move it to one of these random hexes. But it also says you have to move them immediately after flipping them. So how I'm going to interpret that is, I'm going to flip them over and then move them to one of these random hexes. 3, you'll go to 3. Flip them over. One. I'm going to go this way. Here I'll flip these. So this is from a tri-ship E and tri-ship B. Once I get a second one of those, my turn is over. Tri-ship C, see where it goes. 2. F, see where it goes. 4. Then we'll flip this one over. So this is also a tri-ship B, and we have one down here already. We see where that goes. 3. And since we've gotten a second part of one of the tri-ships, which is B, we stop. Otherwise we would get if we would have completed all those, we would have got one more bonus movement. There's no Virunian combat because they're not stacked with another coalition or adjacent to one. And if they're adjacent and they were a complete tri-ship, they would also attack, but that's not the case. So when we go to the coalition movement phase, different kinds of movements. This type can do teleporting, or it can do linear. This type is linear. This one does wobbling, and the human one does linear. And it's a big deal if you make a turn, because if you make a turn from your facing, you're exposed to fire from any enemies up to 8 hexes away, so that's something we want to avoid. But also, too, they want to try to catch the Virunians while they're over here, because these values and these hexes are the effects on the Virunians. Around the StarGates here, they have negative values, which will hurt the combat, but when they get closer to their power source, which is the null gate, they get positive values. So they want to kind of catch them as they can. But he doesn't want to get too far away from the rest of the ships either. And then he'll do a wobble. A wobble means that he can go forward in any number of four hexes, but he can go in any orientation or any turning. He'll go up here. You can go 9. He's not too concerned because he's pretty strong. He's got a 6 attack, although he does only have 1 defense, which isn't great. And neither of these tri-ship control units have an attack ability. Then he's doing teleporting, and he can only teleport linearly, and if he goes beyond 6 and he rolls the dice, and he might be off by 1 hex one way or the other. But he wants to stay over here by the human. And you can only teleport in a straight line. There's no combat yet. They aren't on a Virunian hex yet. Then we go to the next turn, the coalition staging segment. You can put 1 of each type onto the board. And he'll think a little more about where he wants to place these. He wants to go after these control units here, and he can maybe catch one if he goes in a straight line there, so we'll put him there. He'll put a wobbler up here. Try to get in with those guys. This one goes linearly. We'll put that one over here as well to kind of try to catch those guys. And then the teleportation use, and these also can be used to teleport humans if they don't move. So he'll stick by this human here. And you can't stack any on top in the coalition staging area. Normally you can stack units, 3 friendlies and 3 enemies on one monad. That can't stack with a tri-ship either. And then we'll go to the Virunian deployment phase. We see how many come onto this StarGate. Roll dice. 3. Divide that by 2 and round it up. So that'll be 2 that go there. Take 2 randomly, put them here. StarGate B. 5. Divide by 2 and round up, so 3 go there. Virunian movement phase. It's a good thing about these control ships, they can wobble. So they're going to wobble their way up to here. He'll just kind of try to get away. But he'll actually head back here too and try to meet up with him over here. One type of movement is skimming, where when you come into an orbit about a stargate, you spin around in like the orbit and then you come out, and you have to spend, after you enter, you have to spend 2 more turns. But I'm assuming since they didn't enter the orbit from coming out of it, they don't need to do a skimming maneuver as they first start exiting it. That's my interpretation. So they're going to head out. He can wobble 5. He's going to join up with these other units here, at least head in that direction. And before they move these two, they will turn all these others, because when you move a second part of a tri-ship, the same tri-ship, then your move ends. So we'll turn these over. It's a monad. That doesn't affect any tri-ships. Goes into 5. That's an E, and there's already an E there, so this will end his movement, but he goes in 6. And that's the end of his movement. So he doesn't get to these guys since they exposed the second tri-ship and moved it. No combat yet. This coalition force can do a wobble, and he's going to do that. He can wobble 4. He'll wobble right on top of this transport unit. He'll move up. He'll be entering a skimming mode next time, where he goes around here and then kind of shoots out the other end. Teleport. He'll come up here the next time. You might assist. He may be able to assist a human in teleporting. We'll see. He's going to take a chance here. None of these items have attack capability, so I'm assuming they can't take a shot at him when he does a turn. It doesn't. I don't think it says it explicitly in the rules, but I assume if they don't have attacking, they can't attack him when he's turning. But he can turn. He can attack. He'll go 2, 3, 4, make a turn, and he'll get attacked here before he can do his final movement there. And turning is kind of deadly. If you have units within 8 of you, if they roll 1 or 2, they destroy the unit. And he's within 1, so he can definitely take a shot. If it's 1 or 2, that unit's destroyed. No, he's okay. There's no others that are within 8 that have firing capability, so he'll move up here, complete his turn. He can move linearly, or he can teleport. And he'll move linearly this time. Turn. And again, he gets a shot at him. Let's see if these are within 8. They're not quite at 8. He'll get a shot at him. On a 1 or 2, he'll destroy him. He destroys him. Yeah, he's out of there. He'll chase down this control unit up here. Turn. These 2 can take a shot at him. Actually, all 3 of these can take a shot at him. Yep, destroys him too. You can move up to 9. When you move on to an opponent's hex, you have to look at your approach, because that has to be resolved before, even if you're just passing through, whether it's combat or just passing through, you do the approach. And the options are maneuver, charge, or warp for each of them. The Dwynebs have to do charge as their approach. And I'm assuming the Virunians know that too, so they'll choose the one is more favorable for them, which is charge, because if they do a charge and the others are doing a charge, they need a 2 or less to destroy the incoming attacker unit. Then shielded approach, if one side has more units than the other, then they get shielding, which would affect the matrix number. And from the charge to charge here, the approach matrix number is 2. If they go here, if the defender is shielded, that changes to 3. If the attacker is shielded, it changes to 1. But neither are shielded, so the number is 2. 5. So no effect. Then we'll continue the movement. Skimming is when you go into the orbital location around a StarGate, and then you basically are orbiting around because of the gravity pull. And once you go in there, you have to go at least 2 other hexes before you go out, and that's how you track them with the skimming. But also if you have remaining movement points, you have to keep going around. You can't just stop, so he couldn't stop right there. He went 5. He's got 4 movement points left. 1, 2, 3, 4. So he's orbiting that StarGate. He'll do a wobble. 1, 2, 3, 4. He can't quite reach that control device, that control module, so he'll stop there. And then combat, we have 2. One in this location. Then one in this location. Since the control and propulsion modules don't have attack strength, if they were to remain in a hex of the coalition during the Virunian attack phase, they'd be automatically eliminated. But they do have defense, so they will see how they resolve in the combat of the defense. So before we conduct this first battle, we look at the approach and also the shielding. The approach, they both secretly determine what approach they're going to use, and the meta Mexish can't use charge. So they're gonna go with maneuver, and the Virunians will choose maneuver as well. We look at the comparison. The attacker is maneuver, and the defender is also maneuver. So it gives us 2. If they roll a 2 or less, the coalition will use unit. And then we look at shielding, the shielded approach chart. So this is we're at the approach numbered here. And if either one of them has more units than the other, they will have the shielding, but they both have the same number, so there's no shielding. But if the defender is shielded, the number to roll will be 3 or less. If the attacker is shielded, it'll be 1 or less. But there's no shielding, so it's 2 or less. And there's no effect of the approach, and then we'll get onto the combat for that. And we're doing this combat here. See if there's no modifiers right there. These are pluses and minuses to the Virunians, and there's no modifiers in that hex. And the combat is, his defense is 5, and the attacker's ability is 4, so it's 4 to 5. 4 minus 5, so he's on the -1 column here. 6. EA. All attacking units are eliminated. It didn't go well for him. Look at the approach for this battle. And the Duaniabs, which are these, they can only use the charge approach. And I'm assuming the Virunians know that. So they'll choose the approach option most favorable to them, of course. So if the attackers charge, if they choose charge also, then with a 2 or less, the attackers will lose a unit. So they'll go with that. And then also looking at the shielded, they both have the same number of units, so neither has a benefit in the shielding. Force, so they didn't get 2 or less, so there's no effect of the approach. Then we'll go into the combat. Check out the combat. The attacker has 6, defender is 5, so it's +1. But then there's also a -1 on the Virunian because they're in that energy hex. So it's a +2 for the coalition. Go to the +2 column. 3. D sub D. All affected units are dispersed. And that applies to the defenders. Dispersed means they're sent to any place within 5 hexes away in a legal place to land, away from the hex, and the opposing player moves them. So he'll be dispersed over here. That's the end of that combat phase. So that's StarGate from SPI from 1979. It's a very interesting game because it's got a lot of mechanics that are definitely unique at the time when it came out, I'm sure. You got ships that can combine to get their elements to combine their firepower and abilities. And then you have differing movement of the coalition forces, wobbling, teleporting, linear motion. Turning, it's interesting that turning has such a big possible negative effect, and you turn, you're exposed, and you can get shot at and 1/3 of a chance of being destroyed. That's interesting. And you have forces of energy that the Virunians either helps them or hurts them, depending on if they're close to StarGate, it hurts them, but if they're close to their null gate, that's their power source, and they have a greater defense chance. So not a huge amount of units, but it's a mini game, and it's got enough units there so you can see how it plays out. I also like that you can try different tactics when you're approaching a unit, and then kind of guess what your opponent's going to do and have that affect the combat results as well. Combat is pretty quick. I definitely like that it has all those concepts. Units are kind of basic, but it does the function. I think it translates well to a bigger game. Like for instance, since it doesn't have that many units, you could maybe use miniatures and use a larger hex map. That would all help quite a bit. Overall, I'm glad I got it. It's enjoyable, and it was definitely a unique kind of game. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Thanks a lot.